Hello. This is session number 34. Right, we are continuing in chapter 5. Right, the title of chapter 5 is Healing and Wholeness. Right, and that healing, as we've been saying, is the integration of the split mind. When the split mind is no longer split, the mind is healed. And what causes the split in the mind is the idea that I could be separated from my source. I could be separated from God. Right? It causes the mind to split, and there's the choice, which happens very quickly, every millisecond, all right, of the day. There's the choice to believe in separation, to believe I've separated, or to choose the right-minded thinking and be reunited with your source, right? Reunited with the memory of who you are. And in chapter 5, Jesus is introducing us to the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the memory of who you are. All right? Jesus is calling him a comforter, a messenger, the bridge, right? The interpreter, the guide, all different things. All right? But I think the one that gives me the greatest clarity is the idea that the Holy Spirit is the memory of who you are. The memory of who we are that we took with us, all right, into this experience. Okay? All right, as they'll tell us over and over again in different ways later on in the book, you are at home. You are at home in God, dreaming of exile. Right? And into that dream, we take with us the memory of who we are. Today we are focusing on section 3, the Roman numeral 3, all right, the Guide to Salvation. It's on page 78 in the text. So the Guide to Salvation. The way to recognize your brother is by recognizing the Holy Spirit in him. I have already said that the Holy Spirit is the bridge for the transfer of perception to knowledge, so we can use the terms as if they were related, because in his mind they are. This relationship must be in his mind because, unless it were, the separation between the two ways of thinking would not be open to healing. He is part of the Holy Trinity because his mind is partly yours and partly God's. This needs clarification, not in statement, but in experience. Think about that. All right? The Holy Spirit is part of the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, because he is part of your mind and part of God's. Right. And he says, this needs some clarity, but not in words. Right. The clarity, it would be so clear to us, to everyone, when it becomes an experience. All right? So, just a few sessions back, Jesus said the prayer of the healer. Right? Remember, the healing is the integration of the split mind, the reparation, as he said in the last session. The prayer of the healer is, let me see this brother as myself. Okay? And he reiterates that in a different way. He says, the way to recognize your brother is by recognizing the Holy Spirit in him. By recognizing who he really is. By recognizing that he is you. Right? There is no separation. There is no oneness. There is no other. There is no duality. Right? There's only the oneness. And that's the way to recognize a brother. Right? And he says the Holy Spirit is the bridge for the transfer of perception. Right? Perception goes on in this experience, in the world. Right? So the Holy Spirit is the bridge for the transfer of what I'm perceiving now. Right? I transfer that, or the Holy Spirit helps me transfer that to the realm of knowledge, right? Which is the original abstract realm in which we all exist as one. Right? So the Holy Spirit is the bridge. Right? So we can use the terms perception and knowledge, right, as if they were related, because in his mind they are. Because in the mind, in the view of the Holy Spirit, perception and knowledge are related, because we're going to take the perceptions that we have and ask them to be reinterpreted. Help me to see correctly. So I'm asking that part of my mind that remembers who I am for clarification, for greater sight. Help me to see this correctly. And that brings me from that misperception to the world of knowledge, eventually. All right? I don't even know why we have to get into the eventually. All right? It's just a slip of the ego there. It can be done right now, because as Jesus will tell you later on, the only aspect of time that is eternal is right now, is now. Okay. The relationship between perception and knowledge must be in his mind, because unless it were, the separation between the two ways of thinking would not be open to healing. Okay? So the perception and knowledge are being held, all right, in the awareness of the Holy Spirit, because without that, there'd be too much of a gap. Right? We wouldn't be able to get out of the nightmare of perception in the ego world, right, which is constant conflict. The ego thrives on conflict. It thrives on separation. I see an other. I immediately have to start evaluating and judging the other. Right? Not only for my physical well-being in the dream, but my metaphysical well-being, where my ego says, find out, put your guilt on that other. All right? You'll feel better. Okay? It doesn't work. Okay? So the Holy Spirit is part of the Holy Trinity because his mind is partly yours and also partly God's. Okay? And we use Christian terms in the Course in Miracles. Okay? And there it is. He's part of the Holy Trinity because his mind is partly mine and partly God's, right? He's that mediator, right? He's the in-between, all right? And sometimes I like to think that, well, Jesus is very logical, because it came through Helen, who was very logical. But I also think he likes to, give you a little nudge every now and then, when he tells you this needs clarification not in statement, but in experience. So go to the statement, okay? I have to try to remove something. Okay. All righty then. The Holy Spirit is the idea of healing. All right, it's the idea of bringing the two parts of the split mind together. All right. Being thought, all right, so the Holy Spirit is an idea. Being thought, the idea gains as it is shared. Okay. Being the call for God, it is also the idea of God. Since you are part of God, it is also the idea of yourself. Right? So Jesus is saying, although we can't clarify this in statement, he's going on to clarify it in statement as best he can. So the Holy Spirit is an idea. Being thought, the idea gains as it is shared. We don't lose the thought if we give it away. All right? That can't happen. Thoughts do not leave the mind that thought of them. All right? Which is why we cannot leave the mind of God. All right? But being a thought, it gains as it is shared. Being the call for God is the idea of God. Since you are part of God, it is also the idea of yourself, as well as all of his creations. The idea of the Holy Spirit shares the property of other ideas because it follows the laws of the universe, of which it is a part. So it's a part of the universe. Right? So it shares the property of other ideas. Right? So it's just the same as other ideas. It shares those properties. So it is strengthened by being given away. That's the properties he's talking about. It increases in you as you give it to your brother. Your brother does not have to be aware of the Holy Spirit in himself or in you for this miracle to occur. Right? He may have dissociated the call for God just as you have. This dissociation is healed in both of you as you become aware of the call for God in him and thus acknowledge its being. Okay? So when I see someone else, all right, I see an other acting like a nut, acting out, that can run the gamut from just being silly to being very threatening, violent, psychotic breaks, all extremes, okay? He doesn't have to know. He doesn't have to be aware of the Holy Spirit in himself, right, in order for the miracle to occur. Right? Because if he's acting out extremely, he has forgotten. He really has dissociated the call. Right? As you have, he gently reminds us. So this dissociation is healed in both of you as you become aware of the call for God in him and thus acknowledge its being. So I don't try to paint over, I don't whitewash his actions or her actions, right? I ask the Holy Spirit how to see correctly, and somehow my perception is changed into realizing that he's or she is calling out for the love they think is missing, in whatever form that takes. All right? And this world is a myriad of those forms, right? This world is a call for the love that they think is missing, right? But if we acknowledge the call for God, right, we become aware of it, right? We ask the Holy Spirit, help me to see correctly, right? That healing is in the mind, right? And since minds are one, it's in the bank, so to speak, for this soul who is acting out. Right? So my acknowledging the call for God, right? My acknowledging the Holy Spirit, the memory of who we all are, and asking that Spirit, that memory, to interpret for me, right? To help me see to change my perception. Okay? That acknowledgement, that call for the miracle, it benefits the other also. They don't have to know anything about what's going on. Because the minds are joined, the mind is one. It's in the bank, so to speak, for him or her. Right? There was just a large deposit put in the bank for that person. And somewhere along their experience, their ego experiences, they will come to a point where they say there must be a better way, and they will start to acknowledge that call for God. Right? That they'll start looking for the memory of who they are. Okay? And that is the work of the healer. Let me see this brother as I see myself. Right? And that means allow the Holy Spirit to show me who we both are in actuality. Right? And in a practical sense, that doesn't mean you allow the behavior to continue or allow it to affect you adversely. All right? It's not that. It's be normal, be practical. Right? I mean, if the child is running with the scissors, you can peacefully take the scissors out of his hand. Okay? And if the child happens to be an adult, you can take the proper steps to bring you both to a place of safety, but you're doing it from a foundation of peace, right? By, sometimes very quickly, asking Holy Spirit to help you see correctly, right? So whatever your actions are, they're not founded, the basis of your action is not anger or judgment. I always like that statement that's attributed to the Islamic world. It tells a person to be spiritual, but be practical in this world, where it says, love Allah, but tie up your camel. Okay? My friend Bob Mulvey used to say, keep the honest people honest. All righty then. So the dissociation is healed in both of you as you become aware of the call for God in Him, and thus acknowledge its being. All right? Just another way, just another thing to say is that excuse me, Jesus will keep reminding us there's only one problem. And that problem is the belief that I separated from my source. I believe I separated from love. And in most people on this earth, that manifests in some horrible problems. It manifests in so many different ways. But it's that belief that I'm here on my own, right? As Jesus will say later on, uncertain, lonely, and in constant fear. That's the milieu in which we exist. Okay? So, paragraph 3, there are two diametrically opposed ways of seeing your brother. They must both be in your mind because you are the perceiver. They must also be in his because you are perceiving him. See him through the Holy Spirit in his mind, and you will recognize him in yours. What you acknowledge in your brother, you are acknowledging in yourself, and what you share, you strengthen. Right? So see him through the Holy Spirit in his mind. It's the same Holy Spirit in yours. All right? So we're asking the Holy Spirit, help me to see correctly. Right? I'm willing to see his innocence. Right? So that I don't act out of anger and retribution and heaping guilt on this person. Right? God knows they don't need any more guilt, and neither do we. So I ask the Holy Spirit, who knows us both in the same way, help me to see this. Right? And what you share, you strengthen. Right? What you acknowledge in your brother, you automatically strengthen in yourself. I'm willing to see the innocence. I'm willing to see the beauty. Right? You're automatically acknowledging it and strengthening it in yourself. Right? Paragraph 4 on page 79. The voice of the Holy Spirit is weak in you. That is why you must share it. It must be increased in strength before you can hear it. It is impossible to hear it in yourself while it is so weak in your mind. It is not weak in itself, but it is limited by your unwillingness to hear it. If you make the mistake of looking for the Holy Spirit in yourself alone, your thoughts will frighten you. Because by adopting the ego's viewpoint, you are undertaking an ego-alien journey with the ego as guide. This is bound to produce fear. Okay? So what he's saying is working off the other paragraph, the previous paragraph. All right? See your brother, all right, through the Holy Spirit in his mind. And you will recognize him in yours. Right? What you acknowledge in your brother, you are acknowledging in yourself. And he says the Holy Spirit is weak in you. Right? That's why you must share it. Right? We live with other people around us. We live with experiences. Right? He says, don't cut yourself off from that. Right? He said it's impossible to hear it in yourself. Right? It's not weak. The voice of the Holy Spirit is not weak. Right? It's just limited by my willingness to hear it. So it's limited by my willingness to open myself to the innocence of the other person. The more I can open up and say, I'm willing to see the innocence of the other. All right? I want to take back my projections of guilt onto this person, whoever it is. All right? I mean, it could be the bus driver, you know, could be that guy who's pushing that revolving door too hard, who's standing right behind me, all right? And it could be your significant other a person with whom you spend extended periods of time. Right? Could be the little baby crying in the restaurant. Right? It's that willingness to be open, to not project guilt onto the person or the situation. And when you notice you're doing that, you take it and you say, well, wait a second. I don't want to see it that way anymore. It doesn't go anywhere. I want to see correctly. Right? I want to see everything correctly. Right? That's opening ourselves up to the voice. Right? That's strengthening the voice in ourselves. We're asking for the clarity. We're asking to hear the voice. So if you make the mistake of looking for the Holy Spirit in yourself alone, your thoughts will frighten you, because by adopting the ego's viewpoint, in other words, I'm separate from everybody else. I'm separate. So by adopting that viewpoint, you're undertaking an ego alien journey with the ego as your guide. And this is bound to produce fear. Guaranteed. The ego as your guide will produce fear. Right? And then he tells us the delay is of the ego in paragraph 5. Because time is its concept. All right? And I hearken back to my use of the word eventually. Right? Time is the ego's concept. So delay, putting things off, right? It's an ego thing. Right? Both time and delay are meaningless in eternity. Right? These are concepts that just do not exist in reality, in eternity, where we exist, where we are at home, in this moment, dreaming of exile. So time and delay are meaningless in eternity. I've said before that the Holy Spirit is God's answer to the ego. So he's the answer also, another title with a capital A. Right? Everything of which the Holy Spirit reminds you is in direct opposition to the ego's notions, because true and false perceptions are themselves opposed. The Holy Spirit has the task of undoing what the ego has made. He undoes it at the same level on which the ego operates, or the mind would be unable to understand the change. Okay, so we start where we are. The Holy Spirit undoes the ego at the same level on which the ego operates. Right? So, in our daily life, this is why later on Jesus will ask us to become happy learners. Be joyful that you wake up in the morning and you're going to live your life as a classroom, right? Not as a prison. Right? And the Holy Spirit will undo the things that we experience if we ask, help me to see this correctly. We have to realize that we're perceiving with the ego as our guide, and then say, whoa, wait a second. I don't want that guide anymore. I'm willing to see correctly. Right? I'm willing to see the innocence. I'm willing to have this experience reinterpreted. So all these small, specific, seemingly tiny or large experiences that we have, each one gets brought to the right mind, and we ask the answer, we ask the interpreter, help me to see this correctly. I want to see this through the eyes of love, not through the eyes of the ego. Right? So because it's the Holy Spirit, it's his task to undo what the ego has made. The ego has made everything out of the idea of separation. Right? And the effects of separation: sin, guilt, and fear. Right? And just as a reminder, it keeps coming up and I keep forgetting to mention it. The Course in Miracles uses Christian terms. Right? And it never purports to be the only way home, the best way home, the best way to realize who you really are. Right? It doesn't roll that way. Right? It just uses Christian terms. That's because of Helen Schuckman. That was her vehicle. She was the vessel. She was the vehicle. So it came through her form, and it has the proponents of her form. Right? She had a very interesting life. Right? And she was very logical. She was psychological. She loved. She loved the Christian terms, right? You know, really didn't like a lot of things about, you know, the organization, right? Christian organizations, I suppose, but she knew it was founded on something true, right? But anyway, we use Christian terms here. So that's just the way it is. So, paragraph 6, Jesus says, I have repeatedly emphasized that one level of the mind is not understandable to another. So it is with the ego and the Holy Spirit, with time and eternity. Eternity is an idea of God, so the Holy Spirit understands it perfectly. Time is a belief of the ego. So the lower mind, which is the ego's domain, accepts it without question. The only aspect of time that is eternal is now. Right? So he says, our lower minds, we don't even question time. Right? And he says that time is the belief of the ego. There's a past, present, and a future. Right? You sinned in the past, as we said quite recently. Right? And the fear is in the future. Right? And the guilt is right now. Right? So you get your sin, your guilt, and your fear, past, present, and future. And he says one level of the mind is unknown to the other. We have to invite the Holy Spirit in to clean up our perceptions of the perceptions of the lower mind until the lower mind can fade out. All right? Remember, very early on in the sessions, Jesus says, look, I came here to change things from the bottom up. Right? I didn't come here with a power washer. All right? We're going to change things from the bottom up. All right? Come here with a magic wand. Okay, and I love it. The only aspect of time that is eternal is now. Right? Even, you know, I like Eckhart Tolle. I love his teaching. Right? His concept is exactly this. The now contains everything. Right? And that's where he's helping to bring people, right? Just uses different language, different terms, right? So it's a different form, but the content is the same, right? And if you have your eyes and ears open to it, you'll see all around you, even in this modern age, there are paths that lead you home, right? They just use different words. They just use different words. My wonderful wife, Jean, always, well, sometimes she refers to the Course in Miracles as Chinese math. She goes, I have no idea what it's saying. And yet, the spiritual path that she follows, right, the insights that she has are the same. They bring her to the same place, all right? And she's a wonderful channel of light and love, all right? And she just gets there from a different place. And that's all I have to say about that. All right, so paragraph 7. The Holy Spirit is the mediator between the interpretations of the ego and the knowledge of the Spirit. All right, so it's the mediator. His ability to deal with symbols enables him to work with the ego's beliefs in its own language. All right, his ability to look beyond the symbols into eternity enables him to understand the laws of God, for which he speaks. He can therefore perform the function of reinterpreting what the ego makes, not by destruction, but by understanding. Right. Understanding is light, and light leads to knowledge. The Holy Spirit is in light because he is in you, who are the light. You are the light. But you yourself do not know this. It is therefore the task of the Holy Spirit to reinterpret you on behalf of God. Okay? I'm seeing me through my lower mind, through my ego's interpretation. All right? All the things that go along with that. You know? And he says it's the Holy Spirit's task to reinterpret me, right, on behalf of God. Right? And there's a lot of times in my experience when I just need to get down to the basics, and I ask Jesus, who's the manifestation of the Holy Spirit. It's the Holy Spirit in form, okay? So I ask him, you show me who I am. Because I'm looking at me, I'm evaluating me through my ego, through the filter of my ego. And that's harsh and at times very horrible. And when you can get a grip on that and realize what's happening, and you have trust that this process works, I ask Jesus, please, you show me who I am. Right? So in other words, I'm asking him to reinterpret me on behalf of God. Remind me. Because what I'm seeing, I really don't like. All right? And this is why he says in the next paragraph, well, just let me reiterate, this is how the ego is working. And it's very clear, very succinct in this paragraph. All right? He's the mediator between the interpretations of the ego, right, and the knowledge of the Spirit. Right? His ability to deal with the symbols enables him to work with the ego's beliefs. Right? That's why Jesus, I came here to work from the bottom up. I'm going to use your language, use your symbols. Right? But we're going to reinterpret all those things. because he has the ability to look beyond the form, right? Whatever is happening. Holy Spirit can look right past it into eternity and see us for who we truly are and help us to reinterpret ourselves and what we're doing and what we're seeing. Okay? So in paragraph 8, he says, you cannot understand yourself alone. This is because you have no meaning apart from your rightful place in the sonship. And the rightful place of the sonship is God. Right? This is your life, your eternity, yourself. It is of this the Holy Spirit reminds you. It is this that the Holy Spirit sees. This vision frightens the ego because it is so calm. Right? Peace is the ego's greatest enemy because, according to its interpretation of reality, war is the guarantee of its survival. The ego becomes strong in strife. If you believe there is strife, you will react viciously because the idea of danger has entered your mind. The idea itself is an appeal to the ego. The Holy Spirit is as vigilant as the ego to the call of danger, opposing it with his strength, just as the ego welcomes it. But here's how the Holy Spirit opposes it. All right? The Holy Spirit counters this welcoming of strife. He counters it by welcoming peace. Right? Eternity and peace are as closely related as are time and war. All right? That's why later on, all through the book, Jesus will tell us that what we really want is peace, peace of mind. We don't want the turmoil that goes on in the ego mind. We want the peace that comes with the right mind, right? And as I like to use the metaphor that peace is the fertile soil, right, out of which knowledge grows, sprouts of changes of perception, right, until ultimately knowledge blooms. Right? But it all comes from that fertile ground of peace. Right? So the Holy Spirit doesn't counteract the ego's strife with battling against it. It's just, it offers us the reality of peace. Right? Help me to reinterpret this strife. Help me to see it correctly. Help me to remain peaceful in the midst of what's going on around me. Okay? Because all we have to do is look around our world, right? And you'll see evidence of the ego everywhere. Strife, conflict, right? There's anger, there's fear, there's violence, there's all kinds of nuttiness going on. Right? And in form, we really can't stop it. Right? What we can do is be peaceful in the midst of it. Right? And that happens in the mind. That happens by contacting the answer, the interpreter, the bridge, the comforter, right? The Holy Spirit, the memory of who you are, all those things. We take a step back and say, help me to see this correctly. Help me see it correctly. And he says you can't understand yourself alone. Right? And that means you can't see yourself separated from God. He says you can't understand yourself that way. It has no meaning. Right? So you can't understand yourself alone. And that means separate. That's because you have no meaning apart from your rightful place in the sonship. The only place where you have meaning, the only place where you can truly understand yourself is when you're connected to the sonship. When you have awareness of that, you're always connected to it. But we dissociate that. All right? But we're trying to get back to the awareness of it. All right? Dr. Wapnick once said we're like one big dissociated identity disorder, right? Which is what they call it now. They used to call it multiple personality. So we're just like one big multiple personality disorder. And what we're trying to do is integrate, right? Trying to get back to the oneness, right? And that's splitting up of all the personality into billions of personalities. It's the equivalent of Adam and Eve running into the trees to hide. Right? They believed that they did something wrong and automatically projected onto God. They said, "Oh, now he's angry. I gotta go. I hear him coming. Gotta run." Right? Gotta run. There's God running behind him. I get you. I told you not to eat that fruit. And they ran among the trees. And here we are. Right? So you have no meaning apart from your rightful place in the sonship. Right? This is your life. This is your life. The sonship is your life. That emanation from the mind of God, that's who you are. That's your life. That's your eternity. Right? That's your true self. Right? And it is of this that the Holy Spirit reminds you. The Holy Spirit is the memory of who you are. You are the sonship of God. You are eternity. The Holy Spirit reminds you. It is this that the Holy Spirit sees. Right? This is what the Holy Spirit is looking at when he sees us. He sees the eternity. He sees that you are God's creation. You are the emanation from the mind of God. You're an idea in the mind of God. This is what the Holy Spirit sees. And because it's a vision that is so calm, and it's just so calm, it frightens the ego. It frightens the ego because the ego is not involved. The ego does not exist in that reality. Right? The ego is the belief in separation. Right? It has no meaning in eternity. It has no meaning in the mind of God. This vision frightens the ego because it is so calm. Peace is the ego's greatest enemy. Right? According to its interpretation of reality, war is the guarantee of survival. Right? You have to constantly, even though it doesn't look like war, it doesn't look like, it might just look like seduction. Might just look like, I'm doing business. It might look like I'm, playing football. Right? To the ego, war is the guarantee of its survival. The ego becomes strong in strife. Right? If you believe there is strife, you will react viciously because the idea of danger has entered your mind. Right? Just notice the mindset, the zeitgeist, as you might say, if you want to be a smart ass. Notice the zeitgeist, right? The milieu in which we exist now, the mindset, right? Which is the early part of the 21st century. Right? This is 2019. Right? To be more specific, it's the end of May 2019, right? In New York City. Right? Look at the mindset of what's around. And if I believe that I'm in the midst of strife, I'll be vicious because I got to survive. I got to survive. Right? Because the idea of danger has entered my mind. Right? Because I identify with this form. This form might be harmed. It might be killed. Something's going to happen to it. Right? They might... They're going to take your cheeseburgers away. So the idea itself is an appeal to the ego, right? So the Holy Spirit is as vigilant as the ego to the call of danger. And the Holy Spirit opposes it with its strength, right? But the strength of the Holy Spirit is peace. Peace. The Holy Spirit will remind you who you really are, what your true life is all about. Okay? And that will help peace arise in you. And you'll be able to exist in these times of strife. And if you're a student of history, you could just imagine it was always, there was always strife. I could imagine myself in the middle of the 1800s living in New York City. Incredible strife, enormous amounts of strife. With especially my relatives most likely existing in the 5 Points downtown Manhattan, of which Davy Crockett said that the inhabitants of that section of Manhattan are, they're not worthy to swab the Hell's Kitchen. So there's always been some strife. There always is. Right? It's the ego thing to do. It's the ego interpretation of the world. The ego fights for its very existence, and we identify this body as me. Right? Don't try to take away me. Right? So the ego is just as vigilant to the call for danger, but it counters danger with peace. Right? It welcomes peace. Right? Eternity and peace are as closely related as are time and war. Right? You can look out on any time in history and there's always somebody killing somebody. Always somebody taking advantage of somebody, one way or another. Right? Let's go on to paragraph 9. Perception derives meaning from relationships. Those you accept are the foundations of your beliefs. The separation is merely another term for a split mind. The ego is the symbol of the separation, just as the Holy Spirit is the symbol of peace. What you perceive in others, you are strengthening in yourself. You may let your mind misperceive, but the Holy Spirit lets your mind reinterpret its own misperceptions. Okay? So, perception derives its meaning from relationships. I'm in relation to another human being, an animal, a group, a food, a medicine, anything. Right? I'm in relationship to those things. Right? And those you accept are the foundations of your belief. Right? And he's going to put it succinctly, separation is merely another term for the split mind. Right? The ego is a symbol of separation. Right? Just as the Holy Spirit is the symbol of peace. Right? So what you perceive in others, you're strengthening in yourself. So if I'm perceiving guilt, right? They're doing something wrong. Right? If I'm afraid of them, if I'm judging them as guilty, as doing something wrong, as being vicious and cruel, right? Right? If I'm seeing that, I'm strengthening all those ideas in myself. Right? So you may let your mind misperceive. I'm allowing it. I'm allowing the ego to be my guide, in other words. But if I get tired of that, right, and someday we will, sooner or later you do, right? The Holy Spirit, we ask the Holy Spirit, help me to see this. And he lets your mind reinterpret its own misperceptions. So even though we have individual specific misperceptions, the Holy Spirit will start where we are. Right? Help us reinterpret those misperceptions. Okay? And think about it. The baby is crying. Right? The baby is crying on the airplane. I can have ego perceptions of that. I can have ego interpretations of that. That baby ultimately then is doing something to me. Right? He's taking something from me. Right? Taking away my enjoyment of the flight. Taking away my peace. Taking away my ability to read my magazine. Or to hear whatever I'm hearing, right? Or I can ask the Holy Spirit, help me to see this correctly, right? And I can remove the projections of guilt and judgments, and I'll just see it differently, right? And the baby will still be crying, but I will not be upset. I will not be on the verge of viciousness. Right? I will be at peace. And believe me, it works. Right? Just make sure your only desire is for peace of mind and to be a channel of that peace. Right? And to see that baby as you would see yourself. Right? And so on, with every situation. With every situation. All right? That person cut me off. That person jumped in front of me. Do you hear what they said about me? Or anything. All right? All our relationships can be reinterpreted because they start off as ego interpretations. Okay. And paragraph 10, the ego, Freudian slip. The Holy Spirit is the perfect teacher. Okay? He uses only what your mind already understands to teach you that you do not understand it. The Holy Spirit can deal with a reluctant learner without going counter to his mind, because part of it is still for God. Despite the ego's attempts to conceal this part, it is still much stronger than the ego, although the ego does not recognize it. The Holy Spirit recognizes it perfectly because it is his own dwelling place, the place in the mind where he is at home. You are at home there too, because it is a place of peace, and peace is of God. You who are a part of God are not at home except in his peace. If peace is eternal, you are at home only in eternity. Okay? So the Holy Spirit is the perfect teacher, right? Because it just uses everything, only things that we understand. We think we understand. I understand why that baby's crying. I understand and know exactly why you said that. Right? He uses only what your mind already understands to teach you that you do not understand it. You don't understand it. Right? You don't understand why that person is acting out. Right? Until you ask the Holy Spirit to reinterpret for you. Help me see through the eyes of peace, right? Not through the eyes of the ego. And you'll come to an understanding of why the person is acting out. And so your only response will be love, in whatever form it takes. Whatever form it takes. You'll be compassionate. Right? You can even, in an extreme, you can physically stop someone from doing something to harm themselves or others. You can actually physically stop someone compassionately, which means your foundation is peace. Right? So the Holy Spirit, all right, can deal with a reluctant learner because, without going counter to your mind, because he's in your mind. Right? And the Holy Spirit knows he's in everybody's mind. Right? So the Holy Spirit recognizes it perfectly, because the mind is his own dwelling place, right? The place where he is at home, and you are at home there too, right? Because it is a place of peace, and peace is of God. And you who are a part of God, you're not at home except in God's peace. That's where you feel at home. And if peace is eternal, you are at home only in eternity, right? Not in time, right? So, the ego, in paragraph 11, the ego made the world as it perceives it, but the Holy Spirit, the reinterpreter of what the ego made, sees the world as a teaching device for bringing you home. The world is a classroom. The Holy Spirit must perceive time and reinterpret it into timelessness. Right? He must work through opposites because he must work with and for a mind that is in opposition. Right? He's working for us and with us, even though we are in opposition to the truth. Correct and learn, and be open to learning. You have not made truth, but truth can still set you free. Look as the Holy Spirit looks, and understand as he understands. His understanding looks back to God in remembrance of me. He is in communion with God always, and he is part of you. He is your guide to salvation, because he holds the remembrance of things past and to come, and brings them to the present. He holds this gladness gently in your mind, asking only that you increase it in his name by sharing it to increase his joy in you. Okay? So he's telling us very succinctly, correct and learn. And be open to learning. Right? Help me to see this correctly. Right? Because after a while, you have to realize that ego solutions, they don't work. They might work temporarily, but in the long run, boom, they fail. Right? Someone somewhere recognized as a smart person once said, every treaty contains the seeds of the next war, right? Because it's an ego solution. It's an ego solution. So help me to see this correctly. Help me see it through his eyes. Help me see through the eyes of peace. Okay? So correct and learn, and be open to learning. Be open to learn who you are. Be open to learn who your brother is. Be open to learn who that other person is. Right? And we have to ask. We have to invite the Holy Spirit. We have to invite the memory. We have to invite his interpretation of things. Right? And this is what he means by he's your guide to salvation. Right? And here's Jesus using the words that we find in the New Testament. Do this in remembrance of me. Right? Which is when, at the Last Supper, when Jesus was, as the Catholic Church would say, was instituting the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist, they call it now. They used to call it Holy Communion. Okay? But when he took the bread and the wine and passed them around, and he said, look, when you get together, you break the bread, you take it and you eat it. Right? And you take the wine and you drink it. He says, do it in remembrance of me. Okay? And, this is what he's referring to. All right? The Holy Spirit looks back to God in remembrance of me. So he's remembering God for me. Right? And he is in communion with God always. He's always in that union. He's always one with God. Right? And he is part of your mind, part of the mind. Right? So, and he holds this memory in our mind for us. All right? And he holds it with gladness. And the only thing he asks us to do is to increase it, to strengthen it by sharing it. All right? And this will increase our joy. All right? And that's what happens. We contact that part of the mind that remembers who we are. And it just comes through us. And part of the experience is joy. Right? And it goes out, right, to all those seeming separate minds. Right? To strengthen the idea in the one mind. All righty then. Okay? So, that's section 3, the guide to salvation. Right? And our salvation is when we are saved from this belief in separation, right? By asking the Holy Spirit to reinterpret everything we're seeing. Okay? And you can't do it by yourself. All right then. And I will speak to you again soon. All right. Bye now.